Under the fractured moon, a lone wolf's shadow bled into the snow, whispering of exiles yet to come. Nira Belwyn trudged through the whispering pines, her boots sinking into the pristine white that cloaked the northern wilds like a shroud. The wind howled its mournful dirge, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoke from distant hearths she could no longer call home. Her breath fogged the air in ragged bursts, each one a reminder of the chill that had seeped into her bones, not just from the frostbitten gale, but from the deeper freeze of rejection. The pack had cast her out at dawn, their alpha's decree echoing like thunder in the great hall. She bears no mark, no worth. Let the wilderness claim what the moon has forsaken. She was an omega, unmarked by the goddess's favor, her scent too faint to stir loyalty or desire. In the shadowed valleys of the Iron Fang territories, omegas like her were vessels for the strong, meant to nurture, to submit, to fade into the pack's rhythm without a ripple. But Nira had dared to speak against the council's edicts, her voice a fragile thread unraveling the tapestry of tradition. "Why must we bleed for wars not our own?" she had asked, her words igniting fury in the elders' eyes. They saw treason in her quiet fire, a spark that threatened the hierarchy etched in blood and claw. Now, banished to the borderlands where rogue packs prowled like ghosts, she clutched the silver amulet at her throat, a relic from her mother, cool against her fevered skin. Its crescent moon engraving caught the pale light filtering through the canopy, a symbol of hidden paths and unspoken destinies. It had been her only inheritance, passed down in whispers of a forgotten lineage, but in the pack's eyes it was worthless trinket, like her. The weight of it grounded her as she crested a ridge, the landscape unfolding in stark beauty. Jagged peaks veiled in mist, frozen rivers snaking like silver veins through the snowfields. Far below, the faint glow of campfires dotted the valley, rogue enclaves, lawless and hungry, where the weak were devoured and the strong feasted on the bones of the fallen. Hunger gnawed at Nira's belly, sharper than the cold, but she pressed on, her dark hair whipping across her face like raven wings. The moon hung low, bloated and silver, casting long shadows that danced with the wind's fury. She could feel its pull in her veins, a subtle thrum that omegas were said to sense more keenly, though hers had always been muted, unreliable. Tonight, it whispered of storms brewing, not just in the skies, but in the fates of kings and outcasts alike. As dusk bled into night, the first howls pierced the silence. Distant yet insistent, rising from the east like a chorus of the damned. Nira froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. Rogues, they scented the vulnerable, the alone. She ducked into a copse of evergreens, their branches heavy with ice, and pressed her back against the rough bark. The amulet warmed faintly under her fingers, as if alive, but she dismissed it as her imagination, born of exhaustion. Memories flooded her. The pack's great hall, torchlight flickering on stone walls etched with the deeds of Alpha's past. Torin Hale, the Alpha King himself, had presided over her trial from his throne of carved oak and iron, his eyes, storm-gray and unyielding, betraying no mercy. He was legend made flesh, the ruler who had forged the Iron Fang alliance through blood and unbreakable will, yet whispers spoke of a man haunted by ghosts, his victories hollowed by the weight of command. She had seen him only once before, during a lunar rite, his form towering and scarred, the air around him thick with alpha dominance that bent the very air. But to him, she was nothing, a nameless omega whose pleas dissolved like snow in fire. "Exile," he had intoned, his voice a low rumble that silenced the hall. No explanation, no glance of regret, just the finality of a king's decree. The howls grew closer, a pack's savage symphony, and Nira's pulse raced. She slipped deeper into the shadows, the snow muffling her steps as she navigated a narrow path toward a frozen stream. The water's edge gleamed like polished steel under the moon, and she knelt to splash her face, the icy shock jolting her from despair. Strength, she thought, is not in fangs or crowns, but in the will to rise from the frost. Her mother's words etched into her soul like the amulet's runes. A crackle in the underbrush snapped her head up. Eyes gleamed from the tree line, yellow, feral, belonging to a lone scout, his fur matted and lips curled in a snarl. A rogue, separated from his band, drawn by her scent. Nira's breath caught, but she did not flee. Instead, she stood slowly, her hand instinctively covering the amulet, its silver now pulsing with an inner warmth that spread through her chest like liquid fire. The rogue lunged, a blur of gray and teeth, but she sidestepped, her body moving with an unfamiliar grace, the moon's light bending oddly around her form. He skidded past, confusion flickering in his eyes, and Nira seized the moment, grabbing a fallen branch heavy with ice. She swung it with desperate force, the crack of wood against skull echoing through the night. The rogue yelped, staggering, blood staining the snow, a deep crimson bloom against the white. He fled into the darkness, tail low, leaving Nira trembling, the branch slipping from her numb fingers. She stared at the blood, its metallic tang sharp in the air, mingling with the pine and frost. The amulet burned hotter now, a beacon she could no longer ignore. What sorcery was this? An Omega's lot was submission, not survival through shadowed gifts. But in that moment, under the watchful moon, Nira felt the stirrings of something ancient. A pathfinder's call, perhaps, woven into her blood. The howls resumed, closer still, a full pack converging. She ran then, the wind at her back like an ally, carrying her toward the unknown heart of the wilds. Exile was her sentence, but the night promised trials that would forge or shatter her. And somewhere, in the shadowed throne of Iron Fang, King Torrenhale stirred uneasily in his dreams, haunted by visions of silver light piercing the dark, a omen he could not yet name. Nira's lungs burned as she plunged deeper into the frozen labyrinth of the wilds, the howls a relentless tide crashing at her heels. The moon, that indifferent sentinel, silvered the treetops, turning the forest into a cathedral of ice and shadow. Her amulet thrummed against her chest, a heartbeat not her own, urging her onward through drifts that clawed at her ankles like desperate hands. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as a blade, but beneath it stirred a defiant spark, the same that had felled the rogue scout, a whisper of power she dared not name. The path narrowed to a ravine, its walls sheer and glistening with frost, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and something darker. Blood. Fresh, metallic, mingling with the pine's resinous bite. Nira slowed, her breath shallow, ears straining against the wind's wail. The howls fractured into snarls, closer now, encircling like a noose. She pressed against a boulder, its cold seeping through her threadbare cloak, and peered into the gloom below. There, in a shallow hollow ringed by jagged rocks, a fire sputtered defiantly, flames licking at twisted branches, casting erratic light on a scene of savagery. 7 rogues, their pelts ragged and eyes glowing with feral hunger, circled a lone figure chained to a stake driven into the frozen earth. He was no ordinary captive. Even bound, his presence dominated the night, a storm contained in muscle and sinew. Torrenhale, the Alpha King, his storm-gray eyes locked on his tormentors with unyielding fire. Blood streaked his bare torso, wounds from claws and fangs weeping crimson into the snow, but he did not whimper. His lips curled in a silent snarl, the air around him humming with restrained power, as if the very wind bowed to his will. Nira's heart stuttered. Him. Here, in this forsaken pit? Whispers from the pack had spoken of his campaigns against rogue uprisings, but exile had painted him invincible, enthroned far from such perils. Yet the chains bit into his wrists, iron forged with dark runes that pulsed faintly, sapping his strength like a curse woven by traitors. One rogue, larger than the rest, its fur scarred white from old battles, paced before him, jaws dripping. The mighty king of Iron Fang, it growled, voice gravelly through shifted fangs. Your council's gold bought your freedom once. What will you pay now? Torin's gaze never wavered, but Nira saw the flicker of exhaustion in those depths, the weight of a crown that crushed as it crowned. She should flee. Instinct screamed it. The Omega's lot, to vanish into the margins. But the amulet burned hotter, its crescent moon glowing faintly against her skin, pulling her like a tether to the divine. Curiosity warred with terror. What force had dragged a king to this brink? And why did her blood sing in recognition, as if the moon itself had ordained this collision? A rogue's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. Her scent, faint, unmarked, had reached them. Fresh meat, another hissed, turning toward the ravine's edge. Nira ducked back, pulse thundering. But the wind betrayed her, carrying her fear like an offering. Footsteps crunched in the snow above, heavy and inexorable. She bolted, slipping on ice-slick rocks, her mind a whirlwind of denial. Not him, not now. The pack's rejection still raw, his decree a scar on her soul. Why intervene for the architect of her fall? She burst into a clearing, moonlight flooding the space like spilled mercury. But the rogues were upon her, 3 breaking from the pack to pursue. Their howls shattered the night, a promise of teeth and ruin. Nira spun, grabbing a loose stone, its edges biting her palm. The first lunged, and she swung wildly, the impact jarring her arm as it connected with fur and bone. Pain exploded in her shoulder, claws raking flesh, but she twisted away, the amulet flaring with unnatural warmth that dulled the agony to a distant throb. The second rogue circled, yellow eyes assessing her frailty. "Omega scraps," it sneered, but Nira met its stare, her voice steady despite the tremor. "Touch me, and the moon will swallow you whole." Foolish words, born of desperation, yet they hung in the air like prophecy. The beast hesitated, sniffing the air, confusion rippling through its pack link. In that breath, Nira fled again, weaving through thorns that tore at her cloak, the silver amulet bouncing like a talisman against her racing heart. Deeper into the wilds she ran, until the howls faded to echoes, her body collapsing against a snow-mantled pine. Blood trickled from her wounds, warm rivulets freezing into crimson lace on her skin. The fire below called to her still, a beacon in the dark, and with it, the king's shadowed form. She touched the amulet, its heat ebbing to a gentle pulse, and felt the instinctive pull, a bond unbidden, raw as exposed nerves. Fear whispered retreat, but curiosity bloomed like frost flowers on glass. What curse bound a king so low? And what hidden thread linked her exile to his peril? As dawn's first pallor bruised the horizon, Nira rose, the wind carrying distant snarls. She could not leave him to the wolves. Not yet. The moon watched, silent witness, as she turned back toward the ravine, the amulet her guide through the gathering storm. Strength was not in submission, but in the choice to face the beast within and without. And in Torin's eyes, she had glimpsed a mirror to her own fractured soul, a king broken, yet unbroken. The connection stirred, instinctive and denied, born of fear's forge and curiosity's flame. But the night was young, and trials awaited in the bloodied snow. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Nira's resolve hardened like frost on iron as she retraced her steps to the ravine, the moon's silver gaze a cold benediction overhead. The wind clawed at her wounds, each gust a reminder of the rogue's claws that had scored her shoulder. But the amulet's lingering warmth dulled the pain to an echo, a secret fire kindled in her veins. Blood from her injuries dotted the snow behind her, crimson petals marking her path like an unwilling confession. She could still taste the metallic tang on her tongue, feel the tremor in her limbs from the chase. Yet fear had transmuted into something fiercer, a quiet fury born of the night's revelations. To turn back was madness, an Omega alone against 7 beasts, rescuing the king who had condemned her. But the pull was inexorable, woven into the thrum of her pulse, as if the goddess herself had etched this crossroads into the stars. The ravine loomed darker now, the fire's glow a defiant heartbeat in the abyss. Snarls and guttural laughter drifted up, the rogues' voices laced with malice, their shadows twisting like smoke against the rock walls. Nyra crept to the edge, her breath shallow plumes in the frigid air, and peered down. Torrin Hale hung from his chains, head bowed but unbowed, his broad chest rising and falling with labored rhythm. Fresh blood slicked his skin, tracing rivulets over scars that mapped a lifetime of battles, old and new, etched by claw and crown alike. The lead rogue, its white-scarred muzzle gleaming in the firelight, circled him once more, teeth bared in a grotesque parody of a grin. "Your pack's gold runs dry, King. Perhaps we'll send your head back instead. Let them see what becomes of tyrants." Torrin lifted his gaze, storm-gray eyes burning with restrained thunder. "Traitors like you feast on scraps. The Iron Fang will grind your bones to dust." His voice was gravel and steel, low but resonant, carrying the weight of command even in captivity. Yet Nyra saw the cracks, the subtle sag of his shoulders, the flicker of doubt in those depths. Haunted by the ghosts of decisions that had cost lives, including perhaps her own place in the world. She should have slipped away then, melted into the wilds as exiles did. But the amulet pulsed hotter, its crescent moon etching a faint glow against her cloak, and her feet moved of their own accord. Scaling the ravine's lip required every ounce of her waning strength. Rocks bit into her palms. Snow avalanched in icy cascades down her back. She dropped silently into the hollow, landing in a crouch behind a cluster of boulders, the fire's heat a stark contrast to the night's bite. The rogues hadn't noticed, their focus locked on their prize, but one paused, ears twitching. Nyra's heart hammered, a drumbeat urging retreat. Yet empathy stirred unbidden, a mirror to her own exile in the king's defiant silence. He was no savior to her, but in his chains she glimpsed the isolation of power, the solitude that mirrored her unmarked fate. The opportunity came swift as a shadow. The lead rogue lunged at Torrin, jaws snapping inches from his throat, and in that distraction, Nyra seized a jagged stone from the ground. She hurled it with all her might, the crack of impact against the beast's flank echoing like a thunderclap. It yelped, whirling toward her, and the others followed, their eyes igniting with predatory glee. "An Omega whelp!" the scarred one snarled, shaking off the blow. "Come to join the feast?" Nyra stood, the amulet now ablaze against her chest, its light spilling like liquid silver into the night. Fear coiled tight, but she met their stares, voice steady as the frozen stream. "Release him, or the moon's wrath will claim you first." The words felt borrowed from some ancient rite, foolish yet fervent, and to her astonishment the rogues hesitated, sniffing the air thick with her scent. Faint, yes, but laced now with an undercurrent of power, subtle as mist but undeniable. Torrin's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers across the firelit hollow. Recognition dawned, slow and sharp, the exile from his hall now a specter in the wilds. "You," he growled, voice laced with disbelief and something deeper, wariness, perhaps, or the first thread of intrigue. But there was no time for questions. The rogues charged, a wave of fur and fangs. Nyra dodged the first, her body weaving with unnatural fluidity, the amulet guiding her steps like an invisible hand. Claws raked the air where she'd stood, and she countered with a kick to the beast's underbelly, drawing a pained grunt. Pain flared in her side, old wounds reopening, but adrenaline surged, hot and vivid. Torrin strained against his chains, the runes glowing brighter as he poured his will into breaking free, muscles bulging like forged steel. One link groaned, then snapped, and he roared, a sound that shook the snow from the ravine's edges, as his arm came loose. With feral grace, he seized the freed chain, whipping it like a lash to fell the nearest rogue, its skull cracking against unyielding rock. Together they fought, an unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of survival. Naira darted between legs and shadows, using the terrain as her ally, loose stones to trip, firebrands snatched from the blaze to singe fur and blind eyes. The heat seared her skin, smoke stinging her lungs, but she pressed on, her movements a dance of desperation and dawning instinct. Tauren, half freed now, broke another chain with brute force, his blows landing like avalanches, blood spraying in arcs that painted the snow anew. A rogue lunged at Naira from behind, but Tauren was there, his body shielding hers in a blur of motion, his snarl vibrating through her like thunder. "Stay behind me," he commanded, but she didn't, flanking him instead, her stone finding purchase in a beast's eye. The battle raged visceral and raw, the air thick with the coppery reek of blood, the crackle of flames, and the wet snarls of dying foes. One by one, the rogues fell, throats torn, bodies broken, until only the scarred leader remained, circling warily, its breath ragged. Naira's chest heaved, sweat freezing on her brow, the amulet's glow fading to a soft ember as exhaustion claimed her. Tauren stepped forward, chain dangling like a serpent, his wounds weeping but his stance unbreakable. "Yield," he said, voice a low promise of mercy or doom. The rogue bared its teeth, then bolted into the shadows, tail between legs, its howls fading into the wind. Silence descended, broken only by the fire's dying sputter and their labored breaths. Naira sank to her knees in the bloodied snow, the world tilting, empathy blooming into something warmer, a bond tentative as frost on glass, yet undeniable. Tauren turned to her, rubbing his raw wrists, his gray eyes searching her face with a mix of gratitude and guarded curiosity. "Why?" he asked, the word heavy with the king's unspoken burdens, the guilt of commands issued, lives upended, including hers. She touched the amulet, its crescent cool now, and met his gaze without flinching. "Because exile taught me that strength isn't in chains or crowns, but in choosing to break them. For another." The words hung between them, a bridge over the chasm of their pasts, as the moon watched, its light weaving silver threads through the carnage. In that fragile refuge, amid the embers and echoes, the first cracks in their denials appeared, empathy kindling toward trust. But dawn crept closer, and with it, the shadows of greater threats, the pack's whispers, the council's intrigue, loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. What price would redemption demand when the fire's warmth gave way to the wild's unrelenting cold? Dawn's pallor seeped into the ravine like a hesitant intruder, turning the bloodied snow to a mosaic of rose and silver. Naira knelt amid the carnage, her body a tapestry of aches, shoulder throbbing where claws had kissed her flesh, side bruised from the rogue's glancing blow. The air hung heavy with the iron reek of death, mingling with the acrid smoke of the dying fire, its embers whispering secrets to the wind. She pressed a hand to the earth, fingers sinking into the chill slush, grounding herself against the vertigo of what she had done. An Omega, unmarked and exiled, had stood against 7 beasts and lived. The impossibility of it coiled in her chest, tight as the amulet's chain around her throat. Tauren Hale loomed over her, his silhouette etched against the paling sky, a colossus forged from shadow and sinew. He had shrugged off the last of his chains, the iron links clattering to the ground like discarded oaths, but his movements were measured, each step a testament to the wounds that wept crimson down his arms and torso. His storm-gray eyes, sharp as flint, fixed on her with an intensity that stripped away the night's frenzy, leaving only raw scrutiny. He extended a hand, scarred and calloused, not in command, but in offering, a gesture that felt foreign to the king she remembered from the hall, enthroned and distant. "Rise," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the frost-laden air, carrying the faint salt of his sweat and blood. Nyra hesitated, her gaze tracing the lines of his face, the hard jaw shadowed with stubble, the faint scar bisecting his brow like a lightning strike. Guilt flickered in her. Had she saved him out of defiance or something deeper, a pull she couldn't name? She took his hand, his grip warm and unyielding, pulling her to her feet with effortless strength. The contact sent a jolt through her, not dominance but resonance, as if their pulses aligned under the moon's fading watch. They retreated from the hollow as one, the wind rising to scour the evidence of battle, howling through the pines like a lament for the fallen. Torin led her to a sheltered overhang, a natural alcove carved by ancient glaciers, its walls veined with ice that gleamed like frozen tears. He kindled a small fire from the remnants of the rogue's blaze, branches snapping under his hands, flames leaping to life with a hungry crackle. The warmth bloomed against Nyra's skin, chasing the night's bite, but it did little to thaw the knot of uncertainty in her core. She sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, the amulet resting heavy between her breasts, its crescent moon now dulled, as if sated by the violence. "Why risk your life for mine?" Torin asked again, his tone softer now, laced with the melancholy of a man who bore too many ghosts. He tore a strip from his tattered cloak, binding a gash on his forearm with practiced efficiency, the blood staunching to dark rivulets. His eyes never left hers, probing for truths she herself scarcely understood. Nyra's throat tightened. The pack's rejection still echoed in her bones. His decree, the blade that had severed her from home. Yet here, in this fragile sanctuary, empathy had woven threads between them, his isolation mirroring her own, two exiles bound by the wild's indifferent mercy. "I couldn't leave you to them," she whispered, her voice threading through the fire's pop and hiss. The words felt inadequate, a veil over the instinct that had driven her back, the amulet's insistent thrum guiding her like a star through fog. As she spoke, a shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from within. The silver pendant warmed abruptly, its heat spreading like roots through her veins, igniting a clarity that blurred the edges of her vision. Images flickered unbidden, silver paths unfurling in the snow, hidden trails veering from danger, whispers of the moon revealing snares before they sprung. It was no mere trinket, it was a key, unlocking something dormant in her blood, a pathfinder's gift, the lore of old Omegas who navigated fates as surely as rivers carved stone. Torin's breath caught, his binding forgotten as he leaned forward, nostrils flaring. "What is that?" he demanded, pointing to the amulet, now glowing faintly. Its light casting ethereal patterns on the ice walls, crescents and spirals, like maps etched in starlight. Nyra's heart raced. She had always dismissed the warmth as fancy, the visions as fever dreams from her mother's tales. But now, under his gaze, it surged, pulling secrets from the ether. She saw it then, a vision sharp as a blade, the Iron Fang throne room, shadows coiling around the council elders, their whispers of betrayal thick as smoke. A trap laid for the king, not by rogues alone, but by those closest to the crown, their greed festering like rot beneath the pack's unity. "The amulet, it's awakening," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush, laced with awe and terror. The glow intensified, and she clutched it, the metal searing yet soothing, as if the goddess's breath filled her lungs. Torin's eyes widened, recognition dawning like dawn's first light. A legend from the ancient scrolls, the Omega Pathfinder, bearer of the moon's sight, destined to guide alphas through veils of deceit. His guilt, long buried under layers of duty and loss, cracked open. He had banished her without seeing the mark hidden in plain sight, condemning the very salvation the pack needed. "You are the key," he breathed, voice rough with revelation, his hand hovering near hers, as if afraid to touch the divine. The fire reflected in his eyes, twin flames amid the gray storm, And for the first time, Naira saw not the unyielding king, but the man scarred by choices that echoed his father's fall, the wars that claimed his mate, the council's manipulations he had ignored in pursuit of fragile peace. The prophecies spoke of one who walks unseen paths, revealing truths the mighty blind themselves to. I exiled you, blind to this. Regret hung between them, heavy as the snow's weight on branches, his melancholy a mirror to her pain, forging a bond deeper than instinct, rooted in shared redemption. Naira's chest tightened with the weight of it. Her gift was no gentle bloom, but a burden, demanding she confront the pack's shadows, perhaps even forgive the king who had cast her into the wilds. The amulet cooled, its light fading, but the visions lingered, a spiritual tether pulling her toward destiny's maw. Strength, she realized, lay not in power's grasp, but in wielding sight for compassion's sake. Yet what moral crossroads awaited when revelation demanded she heal the wounds of those who had wounded her? Torin reached out then, his fingers brushing the amulet's edge, a spark jumping between them like moonlight on water. In that touch, the denial fractured further, curiosity yielding to a profound, resisted acceptance. The wind outside howled its approval, carrying distant weavos that spoke of gathering storms, but within the alcove a fragile alliance kindled, the moon's symbols weaving their fates inexorably. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your hidden light. The journey back to Ironfang's heart was a gauntlet of shadows and whispers, the wilds reluctant to release their secrets as Naira and Torin pressed through the veil of dawn. Snow fell in lazy spirals, blanketing the bloodied trail behind them. But the chill in Nira's veins ran deeper than winter's grasp, a foreboding etched by the amulet's lingering pulse against her skin. Its crescent moon, now a quiet ember, seemed to weigh her choices before they formed, a sentinel reminding her that revelation was no gift without cost. Torin walked beside her, his strides measured to match her faltering ones, his presence a brooding storm that both shielded and unsettled. The wounds on his body had clotted to dark scars, but the true gashes lay in his eyes, storm-gray depths swirling with the guilt of unseen truths. He had exiled her, blind to the Pathfinder's mark she bore, and now fate mocked him with the irony. The Omega he had deemed worthless was the thread to unravel the pack's unraveling. They crested the final ridge as midday's weak sun pierced the clouds, revealing the sprawl of Ironfang territory below, a fortress of jagged spires and frozen ramparts, smoke curling from hearths like accusatory fingers. The wind carried the distant clamor of the pack, howls laced with unease, the low rumble of gathering voices in the great hall. Nira's stomach twisted. Memories flooding back like icy water, the council's sneers, the Alpha's unyielding decree that had stripped her of home. Freedom had tasted of solitude in the wilds, but now, with Torin's shadowed form at her side, it warred with the pull of belonging, of mending what was fractured. "They will not welcome you," he said quietly, his breath fogging the air between them, the scent of pine and blood clinging to his skin. "Not after the exile, and I am the one who bound you to it." She met his gaze, the amulet warming faintly, as if urging honesty over the chasm of resentment. "Then let them see what the moon has wrought," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Love was no swift balm here. It resisted like roots in frozen soil, rationalized as duty, yet blooming in the quiet spaces where his melancholy mirrored her pain. They descended into the valley, the snow crunching underfoot like brittle bones, until the pack's sentries spotted them, wolves shifting to human form, eyes widening in shock at their king's return, bloodied but unbowed, flanked by the banished Omega. The great hall loomed, its oaken doors scarred by centuries of claw and flame, torches, sputtering in iron sconces that cast flickering gold on stone walls etched with the pack's storied triumphs. Inside, the air thrummed with tension, the council elders arrayed before the throne like statues of frost-kissed granite. Elder Thorn, the scarred rival whose ambition simmered like banked coals, stood at their fore, his lips curling in feigned surprise. "My king returns," he intoned, voice smooth as oiled leather. But Nira's amulet flared, its heat unveiling the lie, a vision of shadowed meetings, Thorn's whispers to rogue allies, gold exchanged for the chains that had bound Torin. Betrayal, not from the wilds alone, but from the heart of power itself. Torin stepped forward, his hand brushing Nira's arm in a fleeting anchor, the contact sending sparks through her like moonlight on water. "The rogues were but a pawn's move," he declared, his rumble echoing off the rafters, silencing the murmurs. "Thorn, your hand guided the blade. The council's greed has festered too long, treating Omegas as chattel, exiling the very light that could save us." Gasps rippled through the hall, Pack's eyes darting to Nira, who stood unyielding, the amulet's glow subtle but insistent, painting ethereal crescents on the flagstones. She felt their stares like barbs, judgment from those who had once called her kin, now seeing her as intruder or witch. Thorn's face twisted, his form shifting partially, fangs glinting in the torchlight. "Lies from a weakened king and his stray," he snarled, advancing with two loyalists at his flanks, their scents thick with aggression, musk and malice. "You dissolved nothing yet, Hale. The pack bows to tradition, not some Omega's fevered dreams." The hall erupted, wolves pressing forward, a tide of fur and fury torn between loyalty to the crown and the council's iron grip. Nira's heart pounded, the air heavy with the copper tang of impending blood, the wind rattling the high windows like the goddess's warning breath. Torin bared his teeth, muscles coiling, but he glanced at her. A silent question, the weight of his guilt pressing like the crown he wore. War or forgiveness? Power demanded retribution, the pack's law etched in fang and claw. Traitors fed the flames. Yet compassion whispered through Nira's veins, the amulet surging with visions of a fractured future, rivers of blood if Thorn fell, or fragile unity if mercy prevailed. Love or liberty? To forgive him would bind her to this world, to Torin's side, healing the rejection that scarred them both. To walk away meant true freedom, leaving the pack to its rot, her gift untethered to their chains. She stepped between them, the amulet blazing now, its light flooding the hall like spilled silver, forcing Thorn to shield his eyes. "Enough," she commanded, her voice amplified by the Pathfinder's call, resonating in every soul like the moon's tide. Visions cascaded, paths of deceit laid bare, Thorn's alliances crumbling under the weight of truth. The elders recoiled, whispers turning to awe, as the pack stilled, caught in the spiritual snare. "Strength is not in spilling blood anew," Nira said, her words a philosophy carved from her exile's forge, "but in choosing mercy when vengeance screams loudest. Thorn, your ambition blinds you, but the goddess offers a choice: confess and rebuild, or fade into the shadows you sowed." Torin's breath hitched, his hand finding hers amid the tension, fingers intertwining in a grip that spoke of resisted acceptance. Redemption not as reward, but as the hard-won proof of their bond. Thorn hesitated, the rival Alpha's snarl faltering under the amulet's unrelenting gaze, the hall holding its collective breath. Nira's chest ached with the moral precipice. Forgive and forge unity, or unleash war and claim her solitary path. The fire in the central hearth roared higher, flames dancing like omens, blood from old wounds dripping to mingle with the stone's chill. Outside, Weavos rose in the wind, a chorus questioning the soul's true sovereignty. In that suspended moment, as the pack's eyes bored into her, Nira felt the rebirth stirring, not in triumph, but in the raw vulnerability of choice. What wound would mercy heal, and what scar would war leave on the heart that dared to love across the divide? The moon, hidden by day, watched from afar, its symbols weaving judgment into destiny's loom. The great hall of Ironfang pulsed with the raw heartbeat of a pack on the precipice, the air thick as congealing blood, laced with the musk of shifting forms and the acrid bite of fear sweat. Torch flames guttered in their sconces, casting elongated shadows that clawed across the stone floor like desperate spirits, while the central hearth roared in defiance, its fire a living omen devouring logs with insatiable hunger. Nyra stood at the nexus, her hand still clasped in Torrens. The warmth of his calloused fingers, a tether against the storm of stairs boring into her from every corner. The amulet blazed at her throat, its crescent moon a radiant wound spilling silver light that fractured the gloom, illuminating the elders' faces, some twisted in outrage, others softened by dawning reverence. The wind outside battered the high windows, a howling dirge that seeped through cracks like the goddess's unyielding judgment, carrying faint weavos from the borders, echoes of unrest rippling through the pack's soul. Thorn's hesitation shattered the stasis, his partial shift completing in a blur of fury, fur rippling over muscle, fangs elongating into ivory daggers, eyes blazing with the feral red of cornered ambition. Witches' tricks, he bellowed, his voice a guttural thunder that shook the rafters, spittle flecking his muzzle. He lunged, not at Nyra directly, but at Torren, claws extended like scythes, aiming to sever the king's throat in one brutal arc. The hall exploded into chaos. Wolves surged forward, loyalties fracturing like ice under strain, snarls blending into a cacophony that drowned the fire's crackle. Nyra's pulse thundered in her ears, the amulet's heat surging through her like liquid starlight, visions cascading in a torrent, paths of blood if Thorn struck true, rivers of crimson flooding the throne room, the pack splintering into warring factions under the moon's indifferent gaze. Torren released her hand, his body coiling like a spring forged in the wild's crucible, intercepting the rival alpha mid-leap. They collided with a bone-jarring impact, bodies slamming against the throne's oaken base, splintering ancient carvings of lunar hunts and alpha triumphs. Torren's roar vibrated through the stone, raw and primal, his storm-gray eyes locking onto Thorn's with the weight of betrayed brotherhood. The counselor who had feasted at his table, whispered counsel in shadowed nights, only to weave chains from greed's dark thread. Claws raked Torren's side, reopening wounds from the rogues, blood welling hot and slick, staining the flagstones in deep crimson blooms that steamed in the chill draft. Pain lanced through him, but he countered with a savage twist, pinning Thorn against the wall, forearm pressing into the traitor's throat like an iron vice. "Yield, old friend," Torren growled, his voice laced with the melancholy of lost trust, breath ragged against the copper tang of spilling blood. The hall's frenzy paused, breaths held in collective suspense, as the two alphas strained, Thorn's legs kicking futilely, his loyalists frozen by the amulet's lingering glow, which painted ethereal barriers in the air, subtle warnings of doom for those who crossed its light. Nyra's chest constricted, empathy warring with the raw ache of her past. This man before her, the king who had exiled her without a backward glance, now bled for the pack's soul, his guilt a palpable shroud that mirrored her own scars of rejection. Love resisted still, rationalized as the Pathfinder's duty, yet it tugged at her core like the moon's inexorable pull, tender in its tragedy, born from shared fractures under the goddess's watchful eye. She stepped closer, the amulet's visions sharpening. Not just betrayal's web, but the fragile threads of redemption. Thorn's ambition rooted in his own losses, the wars that had claimed his kin, twisting grief into venom, mercy or war. The choice clawed at her, a moral abyss yawning wide. To unleash the pack's fury on him would affirm power's cold justice, freeing her from the bonds of forgiveness, allowing her to vanish into the wild's embrace, her gift unbound by their hierarchies. Yet to pardon invited union, weaving her fate with Torrens, healing the rejection that had forged them both in isolation's fire. The wind howled louder, rattling the doors as if the spirits of exiles past demanded answer, snowflakes drifting in through slits like frozen tears. Thorn gasped under Torrens' grip, his struggle weakening, eyes flickering from rage to a glimmer of desperation. The rival Alpha reduced to a shadow of his scheming self. "You were blind, Hale," he rasped, blood flecking his lips from a bitten tongue. "The Council. We protected the pack from weakness. Omegas like her drag us down." The words struck Naira like claws anew, reopening the wound of her banishment, the hall's echoes mocking her faint scent, her unmarked worth. Murmurs swelled from the pack, some nodding in shadowed agreement, others shifting uneasily under the amulet's silver scrutiny, their doubts laid bare like veins in marble. Torrens' arm trembled, not from fatigue, but from the precipice of choice. His guilt a storm within, haunted by the mate he had lost to council wars, the lives crushed under duty's heel. He glanced at Naira, his gaze a plea wrapped in command. The bond between them deepening in that suspended breath, resisted no longer but accepted as destiny's quiet revelation. "No more," he intoned, voice steadying like thunder after rain. With a deliberate release, he shoved Thorn back, the rival crumpling to the floor in a heap of fur and defeat, gasping for air. The hall fell silent, the fire's pop the only sound, as Torren turned to the elders. Blood dripping from his wounds to pool at his feet, mingling with the stone's ancient chill. "The council ends," he declared, his words carving through the tension like a blade through frost. "No longer will Omegas be cast as shadows, their gifts buried under tradition's weight. Naira Belwyn is no exile. She is the pathfinder, the moon's chosen, and she has saved us from rot within." Gasps rippled outward, the pack's eyes turning to her, awe dawning like moonlight on snow. Thorn rose unsteadily, flanked by his loyalists, but the fight had bled from him, the amulet's light exposing the futility of his stand. Naira's heart ached with the weight of it. Mercy granted not as weakness, but as the true strength of rebirth, choosing compassion over the sweet venom of vengeance. Yet freedom whispered temptations. Slip away now, leave them to their mended thrones, her soul untethered. Torren extended his hand once more, blood-smeared and steady, the air between them humming with unspoken vows, the king's melancholy yielding to hope's fragile bloom. She took it, the contact igniting a warmth that chased the hall's chill, their pulses sinking like weavos under the hidden moon. But as the pack knelt in tentative allegiance, Thorn's eyes narrowed from the shadows, a final spark of rivalry promising that judgment's blade hung yet unsheathed. Outside, the wind carried a lone howl, spiritual and sorrowful, questioning if forgiveness could truly silence the pack's ancient hungers, or if war's embers smoldered still in the heart's frozen depths. What sacrifice would seal their renascimento when love demanded the surrender of self to the greater flame? The great hall of Ironfang trembled on the edge of rebirth, its ancient stones absorbing the hush that followed Torren's decree like a held breath before the storm's release. The fire in the central hearth surged higher, flames licking the air with voracious tongues, casting a golden haze that danced across the blood-streaked flagstones, crimson remnants of the confrontation, now cooling into dark, accusing veins. Nira's hand remained entwined with Torren's, the heat of his skin seeping into her chilled fingers, a quiet anchor amid the pack's shifting gazes. The amulet at her throat pulsed softly, its crescent moon a fading ember, as if the goddess herself exhaled in anticipation, the silver light weaving faint threads through the gloom like promises etched in frost. Outside, the wind howled its eternal lament, rattling the oaken doors and carrying the distant weavos of sentries on the ramparts, a chorus that blurred the line between warning and benediction. Thorn rose from the floor, his form shuddering back to human semblance, fur receding like shadows at dawn, but his eyes burned with the unquenched fire of a rival denied his throne. He wiped blood from his lips, the metallic tang sharp in the air, mingling with the smoke and the underlying musk of a pack teetering on fracture. "You dissolve the council on the word of an Omega?" he spat, voice a venomous rasp that slithered through the silence, drawing murmurs from his lingering loyalists. Shadowy figures clustered near the walls, their breaths ragged, scents laced with the sour edge of doubt. "Tradition is our blood, Hale. Without it, we are no better than rogues, scattering to the winds." Torrhen's grip tightened on Nyra's hand, not in dominance, but in shared resolve, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the hearth's blaze like twin forges tempered by long-buried guilt. The weight of his crown pressed visibly now, etched in the lines of his face, the melancholy king who had lost a mate to the very wars the council had prolonged, his victories hollowed by the echoes of lives like Nyra's, cast aside in pursuit of unyielding order. "Tradition became a chain," he replied, his voice a low thunder that resonated off the vaulted ceiling, steady despite the fresh blood trickling from his side, warm and sticky against his ribs. "It bound us to blindness, exiling the light that reveals our rot. Nyra has shown me, and you, the path forward. Mercy is no weakness. It is the blade that cuts true, forging unity from division." Nyra's heart clenched. The amulet's warmth spreading through her chest like roots delving into frozen earth, stirring the Pathfinder's visions one final time. Silver trails converging on the hall, not in rivers of blood, but in a tapestry of healed wounds, the pack rising as one under the moon's unblinking eye. Yet the choice loomed, visceral and raw, a moral precipice where compassion clashed with the pack's primal hunger for retribution. Thorn's betrayal had scarred them all, his schemes a poison that had nearly felled their king, treating Omegas like her as disposable shadows. To fully embrace union meant sacrifice, surrendering her hard-won freedom, binding her gift to the throne's burdens, healing the rejection that had birthed her strength. War would grant liberty, unleashing the pack's fury to devour the traitor, leaving her to wander the wilds untethered, her soul scarred but solitary. The hall stirred, wolves shifting restlessly, their eyes darting between Thorn and the entwined pair at the throne's base. A young beta stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear, scented with the fresh pine of unscarred hope. The moon marked her. We saw the light. Nods rippled outward, tentative at first, then swelling like a tide, the air humming with the subtle shift, empathy blooming from the night's revelations, the pack's collective breath sinking to the fire's rhythm. Thorn's loyalists wavered, their snarls fading into uneasy silence, the rival Alpha isolated now, his ambition crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. Nyra met Torrhen's gaze. The bond between them no longer resisted but accepted in its tragic tenderness. A love forged not in easy desire, but in the crucible of shared exile and redemption, proof that every wound could find its healer. "Choose with me," he whispered, so low only she could hear, his thumb tracing her knuckles, the touch igniting a spark that chased the hall's chill from her bones. The wind outside softened to a sigh, snowflakes whispering against the windows like the goddess's gentle urging, the scent of impending thaw mingling with the hearth's smoky embrace. She turned to Thorn, stepping forward, the amulet's light flaring one last time, bathing the traitor in silver clarity. "Your grief twisted you," she said, her words a philosophy born of her own rebirth, intimate and unyielding. "But the moon offers paths untaken. Confess and serve the pack you claim to protect, or face the wild's judgment alone." The hall held its breath, the fire's crackle the only sound, blood from Torin's wounds dripping steadily, a rhythmic reminder of sacrifice's cost. Thorn's shoulders sagged, the fight leaching from him like color from frostbitten leaves. He knelt, head bowed, his confession spilling forth in broken tones. Alliances forged in desperation, greed masked as loyalty. Torin nodded, releasing Nira's hand, only to draw her closer, his arm encircling her waist in a union sealed by the pack's watchful eyes. "The council dissolves," he proclaimed anew, voice ringing with ethical resolve, replaced by a circle of equals, alphas, betas, omegas alike. No more exiles for the unmarked. Nira Belwyn stands as pathfinder, her light our guide. Cheers erupted, raw and visceral, howls rising to join the wind's chorus, the pack converging in a wave of fur and embrace, scents blending in a symphony of renewed kin. Nira leaned into Torin, the amulet cooling to a gentle thrum against her skin, its crescent a symbol of their renascimento, sacrifice in forgiveness, healing in acceptance, union as the ultimate redemption. Yet as the celebration swelled, Thorn's shadowed glance lingered, a faint ember of rivalry promising that peace was fragile, won in blood and choice. The moon rose outside, full and luminous, silvering the snowfields beyond the hall, its light filtering through the windows like a spiritual vow. Strength, Nira realized, lay in this surrender, to love across hierarchies, to heal the broken king and the pack that had rejected her, proving that destiny was no chain, but a flame kindled in the heart's deepest winter. The wind carried their weavos into the night, a testament to rebirth's quiet power, where every Omega's hidden light could crown the fallen, and every Alpha's guilt find mercy's embrace. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.